Hello all. I just watched Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania. I must admit I was surprised because I thought it was Ant-Man Quantumania. But the fact that Wasp is in the title tends to make sense given the film I've just watched. The story itself is actually quite a common trope. Travellers end up in a strange land and they help the native population overthrow a dictator. It's been used in literature and film for as long as I can remember. The problem here is that the story folds under the weight of its own convoluted narrative. It does feel like they threw everything at it, far more than needed to be there, and I think it would have benefited from being much simpler. I hate to say the words high concept because that is far too flattering, but you're dealing with the quantum realm, a micro-universe, time travel, multiverses. And whilst that stuff might be easy fodder to most sci-fi fans or comic book readers, to the general movie-going public I do wonder whether it will just be boring, especially as there's no actual emotional engagement in this film at all. There's nothing really to hook on. It's supposed to be about a father's love for his daughter, but even that doesn't really come across for me. I found it emotionally empty, really. It was fine, but really hollow. And once again, it feels like what is known as the MCU. Not a phrase I tend to use, as funny as I find it. And despite being a charged phrase, I don't know how anyone can deny it now. This is yet another MCU film where it's all about girl bosses. Just like Wakanda Forever. Just like She-Hulk. Just like multiple other projects that have come out of Marvel recently. Paul Rudd is engaging because he's always fun to watch. And the beginning of it I quite liked. Well, probably the first 10-15 minutes. And maybe even a little bit longer. But then it just gets so weighed down by its own excesses. And Ant-Man doesn't achieve anything. He constantly fails and has to be saved by a girl boss. If it's not his daughter, it's Hope. Or Janet. And I honestly have no clue who Michael Douglas is playing in this film. Because he's certainly not playing Hank Pym. If Hank Pym had been neutered, this is this character. It is bizarre. As I've said before, I don't have an issue with strong female characters or strong female leads. But this is a pattern. This is every project now from Marvel. Undermine the men to lift up the women. And it's just boring and predictable. I appreciate this is Scott Lang's character. He tends to be more of a jokey hero. And on its own, that's fine. As I say, it's a pattern now with all the heroes. Janet Van Dyne is the boss. His daughter is a genius, out of nowhere. And we already know that Hope is a better fighter than him. And I didn't have a problem with that in Ant-Man and the Wasp. I know there's been other commentators who've kind of said that was the start of it all. But for me, the Wasp has always been a better character than Ant-Man in the comics. I always preferred her character. And she was always stronger than him and smarter than him and kind of more heroic than him. So that was never an issue for me in that film. But it just goes into overdrive in this one. I'd say Jonathan Majors does a good job. He's definitely got an air of menace about him. And it was a very powerful performance from him. The broader problem is that for all his boasts and all his power, he gets beaten by Ant-Man and the Wasp. And the other iteration we've seen of him was beaten by Sylvie. And he's supposed to be the big threat. Now obviously we know there are more Kangs out there because of the multiverse. And that is again alluded to in this film. To be honest with you, I've never been excited by Kang. I know he's a comic book favourite for some, but he leaves me cold. And honestly, I can't remember a single Kang story that was particularly outstanding to me. As I say, there are others who will be incredibly excited that the character's in here. The action was fine. And there are some fun moments. I forgot to mention, the rebellion is led by another girl boss, of course. MODOK is absolutely awful, as is the humour in this. MODOK is just ridiculous. Every time there's any dialogue between him and somebody else, it really is cringeworthy and so unfunny. They've utterly destroyed that character. And I know he's ridiculous looking anyway. In the comics he's ridiculous looking, and it's probably not one they should have put in the MCU. But dear God, did they make him an utter laughingstock. And the humour throughout it isn't funny. And it was one of the things I liked about the first two Ant-Man films. They're not high on my list of MCU films, but they're light-hearted, simple, fun stories. And the context around this didn't fit that character. So the light-heartedness just felt jarring. Some of the scenery and the imagery is really imaginative, and I applaud them for that. The problem is, every set looks like a set with just CGI projected on the background. It's not an immersive world. And at times the CGI is shockingly bad. I mean, you know it's CGI because it's an insane fantasy world. But as I say, reality and that CGI fantasy don't sit together particularly well. There's a little yay socialism moment in there, and quite a on-the-nose analogy between the police and fascists. And also Scott's daughter is an activist. Actually, that is something I didn't like about the beginning. Scott's become a wastrel, kind of a joke. Hope is trying to save the world through the company. His daughter's trying to save the world by fighting the man and being a super genius, while Scott's kind of living on past glories. Mind you, saving half the universe is a pretty major glory to live on. Whilst I don't think it's particularly incongruous with the previous films in this series, it does add to the Ant-Man neurophilia motif. You know, there's a point where Cassie wants to help, but Scott doesn't. He's caring about his daughter who wants her out of the way, but it just comes across as he doesn't care and just wants to get out of there. There was one of the probably worst plot contrivances I think I've ever seen. Without going into detail, it almost goes, we tried to mend it. We tried and tried and tried, and we tried everything we could ever try to mend this, and nothing worked. 5 minutes later, we mended it. You tried everything, suddenly it works. Bad writing. Bad writing. They didn't even come up with a reason why something else worked. It was just like, oh no, it worked then. That bugged me. That really did. Is that a pun about an Ant-Man film? Possibly. I should probably apologise as well. Although that joke was probably better than every joke in this film. I understand that it was originally too dark, and I believe it was Bob Iger wanted them to put more humour in it. And it kind of shows because the humour's ill-fitting in weird places as usual with Marvel recently. The after credit scenes are fine. References that Marvel comic fans will squeal at. And also a tie into an upcoming MCU project. And I have to say, after a truly lacklustre Phase 4, this is a bad start to Phase 5. I'm looking forward to the Guardians of the Galaxy and probably Secret Invasion, but there's not much else I'm looking forward to with the MCU. And being a lifelong fan of the comics, that's quite depressing. I'm their core audience and I'm losing interest. I really hope Disney and Kevin Feige wake up to this. I don't care if the cast is diverse. I just want good stories. I didn't hate it. It's just pretty hollow, like a lot of what's coming out of the MCU at the moment. I will watch it again, which is some form of recommendation given I've watched barely any of Phase 4 more than once. So there's a bit of faint praise. Anyway, before I give too much away, I think I'll leave it there. So thank you for listening. If you have seen it yourself, I'd be interested to know what you thought. Obviously no spoilers. Please like and subscribe. And if you fancy throwing some money my way and having a damn good read, my comic's available from my website. Thanks again, and peace out.